The wind howled through the tall oak trees as Daniel's car rolled down the narrow country road. The air was cold and sharp, the kind that made your breath visible. He had been driving for hours, counting the miles until he reached home. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about family, laughter, and warmth, and for the first time in years, he'd finally taken time off work to spend it with his loved ones. He imagined his mom setting the table, his uncle teasing him for being late, and his grandmother waiting by the window with that soft smile she always had for him. When he turned into the long, familiar driveway, something felt wrong. The house stood still and silent under the gray sky. No lights glowed through the windows, and the porch swing creaked slowly in the wind. He frowned, cutting the engine. Usually, by this time, the smell of turkey and pumpkin pie would be spilling out the windows. Instead, the air was empty. He stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes, and climbed the porch steps. The door was locked, which was strange. They never locked it when they knew he was coming. He knocked once, then again, louder, no answer. His pulse quickened as he fished the spare key from under the flower pot and unlocked the door. The house was cold. Not just chilly, but freezing, as if the heater hadn't been on for days. Dust hung in the air, and the faint smell of something burnt lingered. Dishes sat unwashed in the sink, a few weeks' worth by the look of it. The dining table was bare. The only sound came from the old grandfather clock in the hallway, ticking slowly, echoing through the stillness. "Mom?" he called out. "Uncle Harold?" Silence. He dropped his bag by the couch and checked each room. The living room was empty, the guest room stripped of sheets, and the master bedroom, his mother's, looked untouched for weeks. Her jewelry box was gone. Drawers were open, clothes missing. His throat tightened. Something wasn't right. Then he heard a faint cough from the back of the house. He turned sharply, following the sound until he reached his grandmother's room. The door was slightly open, and the flickering light from a small TV spilled into the hall. Inside, Ruth sat slumped in her old armchair, a blanket wrapped tightly around her frail frame. Her white hair was tangled, her eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. When she saw Daniel, she blinked as if she couldn't believe it. "Danny?" she said weakly. He rushed to her side. "Grandma!" "What are you doing here alone? Where's Mom? Where's Uncle Harold?" She smiled faintly, but her lips trembled. "You came home," she whispered, ignoring his questions. Her voice cracked, dry from days without enough water. He knelt beside her, his heart pounding. "Grandma, where are they?" Her eyes darted toward the coffee table. A folded envelope sat there, yellowed at the edges, with his name written on it. Her hand shook as she pointed to it. "They're gone, Danny. They're not coming back." He stared at her, not understanding. "Gone? What did she mean? Gone where?" He picked up the letter and tore it open. The handwriting was his uncle's, neat and cold. "Daniel, your mother and I have decided to move out of state. We've sold the house and divided the money. The old place wasn't safe for Ruth anymore, and you were never around to help. We've arranged for a nurse to check in on her until she's placed in a care home. Don't worry about her. She'll be fine. Take care of yourself." Harold Daniel read the letter twice, his jaw tightening. There was no signature from his mother, just Harold's name at the bottom, written like a business deal. He looked around. There were no signs of a nurse, no new medication, no food, just a frail old woman and an empty house. "They left you?" he asked softly, though anger already burned in his chest. Ruth's eyes glistened. "They said they'd come back soon, but it's been weeks. I tried to call, but the phone stopped working." Daniel clenched his fists. "They took everything, didn't they?" She didn't answer, but the silence said enough. He noticed the mail stacked by the door, unpaid bills, eviction warnings, even a foreclosure notice. His family had not only abandoned her, they had drained everything before walking away. He stood up, pacing the room, his mind spinning. "They sold the house," he muttered. "They stole your money. They left you here like this." Ruth closed her eyes, exhausted. "Your mother. She said it was for the best. She said I'd be taken care of." Daniel's voice broke. "She lied to you, Grandma." That night, Daniel worked in silence. He cleaned the kitchen, made soup, fixed the heater, and gathered blankets. He didn't say much, afraid his anger would spill over. Every corner of the house told a story. Missing furniture, empty shelves, boxes left half-packed. His mother and uncle hadn't just left. They had stripped the home bare. When Ruth fell asleep, Daniel sat by her bed, watching her breathe. His mind was a storm of memories, his mother teaching him how to ride a bike, his uncle helping him fix the roof, the family dinners where they'd laugh until their stomachs hurt. And now, all of it felt fake. He opened his laptop and started digging. He found recent bank transactions under his grandmother's name, large withdrawals made just before they vanished. He cross-checked her accounts, only to find them emptied. He checked property records. The house had been sold 2 weeks ago. His mother's signature was right there. Daniel leaned back in the chair, his heart pounding in his ears. They had betrayed not only Grandma, but him too. Everything his family stood for, loyalty, care, love, had been replaced with greed. He turned to look at Ruth, sleeping peacefully despite it all. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. She had no idea how badly they had hurt her. He thought of calling the police, but then what? They were his family. The thought made him sick. He spent hours staring out the window. The moon was full, lighting the fields behind the house. He could almost see his childhood there, running barefoot in the grass, chasing fireflies, listening to Grandma's stories about patience and kindness. But tonight, those lessons felt distant. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt something cold and sharp bloom inside him, a desire for justice, but darker. It wasn't about reporting them. It was about making them understand what they had done. They had left his grandmother to die. They had stolen everything that mattered. The thought of them laughing somewhere, living comfortably on stolen money, made his hands shake. He imagined confronting them, seeing their faces when they realized he knew. He wanted to see fear in their eyes. Ruth stirred slightly in her sleep, murmuring something that sounded like his mother's name. He walked over and covered her gently with another blanket. "Don't worry, Grandma," he whispered. "You won't be alone again. I'll take care of you now." As the night grew colder, Daniel sat back in the armchair, staring into the darkness. The quiet of the house pressed against him like a weight. The betrayal had changed everything. The warmth of family had turned into something bitter and hollow. He thought about calling his mother, demanding answers. But deep down, he knew there was nothing she could say to fix this. Some lines once crossed couldn't be erased. He looked at the letter again. Its words burned into his mind. His uncle had signed it with casual confidence, as if abandoning an old woman was nothing. As if Daniel wouldn't come back. As if he'd never find out. They had underestimated him. As dawn crept through the curtains, Daniel made himself a promise. He would find them. He would make them face what they'd done, not through violence, but through something far more painful, exposure. They had taken everything for greed. He would take from them what they valued most, their peace, their reputation, their comfort. But for now, his priority was Ruth. She was fragile, barely able to walk without help. He would rebuild this house for her, even if it meant starting from nothing. He stood by the window as the first light touched the frozen fields. His breath fogged against the glass, and his reflection looked unfamiliar, colder, harder. The old Daniel was gone. "This isn't over," he whispered. "They'll pay for what they did." Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling through the trees like a warning. Thanksgiving was supposed to bring family together, but this year, it had torn his apart. And in that wreckage, something new had been born inside him. Something relentless. And as his grandmother slept peacefully in the next room, Daniel began to plan. The morning sun crept through the thin curtains, falling across Daniel's face. He hadn't slept all night. His mind kept replaying the same questions. Why did they do it? How could they leave her? Every time he looked at his grandmother resting quietly in her chair, the anger returned stronger than before. He had always believed family was sacred, but now that word felt poisoned. Ruth woke with a weak smile. "You didn't sleep, did you?" she asked softly. Daniel shook his head. "I just needed to think." "You're thinking too much," she murmured, sipping the tea he made for her. You can't change what they've done. Maybe she couldn't, but he could. After breakfast, Daniel drove into town to buy groceries and medicine. While waiting at the pharmacy, he overheard two women talking near the counter. One mentioned an antique shop that had just opened in another town, R&H Treasures. The name made his heart stop. R&H, Ruth and Harold. His uncle had always used Grandma's name for his business ventures. It was his way of making things look honest. Daniel pulled out his phone and searched. The shop's website came up instantly. Clean, polished, and successful. Pictures of his mother and Harold smiling behind a glass counter filled the screen. They looked happy, carefree. His grandmother's stolen money had built that life. His hand tightened around the phone. That night, he printed out every photo and every article about the shop. He created a folder filled with proof, bank transfers, sale records, everything he'd gathered since returning home. Each piece of evidence felt like a step closer to justice, but it didn't calm him. It only fueled him. He didn't tell Ruth what he'd found. She was already too fragile, her health failing more each day. He stayed by her side, pretending everything was normal, but inside he was a storm. At night, he couldn't stop imagining his mother and uncle sitting in their new store, laughing about how they'd fooled everyone. He started recording messages to himself, not out loud, but in his mind. You'll make them see what they did. You'll make them face it. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about making them feel what they made Grandma feel. Fear, guilt, shame. Days passed, and his plans grew clearer. He called an old friend from college, Leo, who worked in private investigations. Daniel didn't tell him everything, only that he needed background checks and confirmation of financial fraud. Within 2 days, Leo called back. They've moved your grandmother's funds to an offshore account, Leo said. They made it look like she authorized it. Forged her signature on the sale papers. Daniel felt his stomach twist. Can we prove it? Easily. But what do you plan to do? Daniel hesitated. Part of him wanted to take it to the police right away, but another part wanted to handle it himself. Just get me everything you can, he said finally. I'll take care of the rest. When he hung up, he looked over at Ruth sleeping in her chair, her hands folded gently. She was the reason he couldn't let this go. She had always given everything for family, and this was how they repaid her. That night, as rain tapped against the window, Daniel sat by the fire and thought about what kind of justice he wanted. He could destroy their business with one email, send the proof to the authorities, to the bank, even the local news. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that wasn't enough. They needed to face him, to see the person they had betrayed. A few days later, he made the drive. He told Ruth he was visiting an old friend, kissed her forehead, and promised to bring back her favorite pie. She smiled and told him to drive safe. He tried to hide the tightness in his chest, part guilt, part fury. The journey took hours. The road stretched endlessly, lined with bare trees and winter clouds. He rehearsed what he'd say over and over. He didn't know if he'd shout, cry, or stay silent. All he knew was that this meeting had to happen. When he reached the small town, the antique shop was easy to find. It stood on a quiet street, the kind where time moved slowly. Through the front window, he could see his mother arranging silverware and Harold counting money at the counter. The bell above the door jingled softly as he stepped inside. His mother turned around, her smile freezing in place. "Daniel?" He said nothing. The look in his eyes made her step back. Harold straightened, clearly uneasy. "Sweetheart," his mother started carefully. "You should have called." "We didn't expect— Where were you?" Daniel interrupted. His voice was calm but cold. Grandma was alone, freezing, starving. His mother's lips parted, but no words came out. Harold stepped forward, trying to sound firm. "We arranged for a nurse." "There was no nurse," Daniel snapped. "There was no heat, no food, no care. You left her to die." Silence filled the room. His mother's face turned pale. Harold looked away. "We didn't mean for it to be like that," she whispered finally. "You don't understand. We were drowning in debt. Selling the house was the only way to survive." "You didn't sell your house," Daniel said. "You sold hers. You stole her savings. You used her name for your business." He pulled out the folder and tossed it onto the counter. The papers scattered, proof of every lie they'd told. "You call this surviving?" His mother trembled, tears in her eyes. "We were desperate. We thought—" "You thought she wouldn't live long enough to find out," Daniel finished. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the sound of the clock on the wall ticking steadily. Harold reached for the papers, flipping through them. "You have no idea what it's like trying to keep a business running," he muttered. "Sometimes you have to make hard choices." "Hard choices?" Daniel repeated, voice low. "You call abandoning your own mother a choice?" Harold slammed the papers down. "She was a burden. She couldn't even remember what day it was half the time. Your mother and I did what we had to." Daniel's hands curled into fists, but he didn't move. His mother flinched at Harold's words, guilt washing over her face. "Stop," she whispered. "Please stop," but it was too late. The damage was done. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and took out a flash drive. "Everything you've done is here," he said quietly. "The transfers, the forged papers, even the recordings Leo found. I could hand this to the police right now. You'd both lose everything. The store, the money, your reputation." His mother's breath caught. "Daniel, please," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I know what we did was wrong, but we can fix this. We'll send money back. We'll take care of her. She doesn't need your money," he said coldly. "She needed her family. You can't buy that back." He placed the flash drive on the counter. "I'm giving you one chance. Watch it. Live with what you've done. You'll destroy yourselves long before I ever have to." His mother reached for him, tears streaming down her face. "Don't walk away, please, let's talk." But Daniel turned and walked out the door. The bell chimed softly behind him, the same way it had when he entered, but now the sound felt final, like closing a chapter of his life. Outside, the air was biting cold. Snow had begun to fall in slow, quiet flakes. He stood there for a moment, letting the chill sink into his skin. His hands shook, not from the cold, but from everything he'd held in for so long. He had faced them. He had looked into their eyes and seen what they were. And somehow, it hurt even more than he expected. Driving home, his thoughts were heavy. He didn't know if he had done the right thing. Part of him wished he'd destroyed them completely, but another part, the part that sounded like Grandma's voice, told him that revenge would never bring peace. When he finally pulled back into the driveway, the house was dark except for the soft light in Grandma's window. He walked inside quietly. She was asleep, her breathing slow and steady. He sat beside her, took her frail hand in his and whispered, "It's over, Grandma. I saw them." Her hand twitched gently in her sleep, as if she'd heard him. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt the weight in his chest ease slightly. He hadn't taken revenge, not completely, but he'd faced the truth. And sometimes that was harder than revenge itself. The snow outside thickened, blanketing the world in white silence. Daniel watched it fall through the window, his reflection faint in the glass. His anger hadn't vanished, but it no longer controlled him. There was still pain, but beneath it, something new was beginning, a quiet strength, born not from vengeance, but from survival. He whispered to himself, "They'll face what they did, in their own way." Then he looked at Ruth and added softly, "And I'll be here, taking care of what's left." The days after Daniel's visit to the antique shop passed slowly, heavy with silence. He didn't tell Ruth what had happened. He didn't tell her that he'd seen his mother and Harold's faces twist with guilt, that he'd left them with the truth and nothing else. The flash drive sat like a ghost in his mind, a reminder that he could still destroy them if he chose to. But each time he looked at his grandmother's fragile smile, the anger that once burned inside him began to fade into something more complicated. Winter deepened. Snow fell almost every day, blanketing the world outside in white stillness. Daniel spent most of his time caring for Ruth, fixing broken things around the house, and trying to bring warmth back into the old walls. Every small task, making soup, paying bills, reading to her before bed, felt like his way of rebuilding what his mother had destroyed. Yet, even as he worked, the memory of that confrontation haunted him. At night, when Ruth was asleep, Daniel sat by the fire, watching the flames flicker. He kept replaying his mother's trembling voice, Harold's arrogance, their desperate faces. He wondered if they'd watched the files on the flash drive. He wondered if guilt had finally reached them. He wanted to believe they felt remorse, but a darker part of him doubted it. People like them didn't change. They just hid better. Then one morning, a letter arrived. It was postmarked from the same town where the antique shop stood. Daniel hesitated before opening it. Inside was a handwritten note from his mother. "Daniel, I've seen everything you left us. I know we can never undo what we did. I don't expect forgiveness. The business is gone. The truth came out. Customers stopped coming. The bank froze our accounts. And Harold has left. I deserve this, I know. But I wanted you to know one thing. I never meant to hurt your grandmother. I thought I could fix things before it got bad. I was wrong. I hope you'll take care of her better than I ever did." Mom Daniel folded the letter, his hands trembling slightly. The revenge he'd once dreamed of had happened on its own. He hadn't lifted a finger beyond telling them the truth, yet their lives had already unraveled. Still, he didn't feel the satisfaction he thought he would. The victory felt hollow. That evening, Ruth noticed the change in his expression as he cooked dinner. "Something's bothering you," she said quietly. He hesitated, then nodded. "They lost everything, Grandma. Their business, their money. They're paying for what they did." Ruth's eyes softened. "And does that make you happy?" Daniel didn't answer. She reached out and touched his arm. "I know you wanted justice, but there's a difference between justice and revenge. One frees you, the other traps you." Her words cut deep. He wanted to argue, to say that they deserved everything that happened. But when he looked at her, this woman who had lost so much and still spoke with kindness, he couldn't. That night, as snow piled against the windows, Ruth fell asleep in her chair beside the fire. Daniel watched her breathing, slow and fragile, and thought about how close he had come to losing her. The anger that had driven him all this time began to feel small next to her quiet strength. The next morning, Ruth didn't wake up. Daniel found her still and peaceful, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her favorite blanket covering her legs. For a moment he just stood there, unable to move. It was as if the world had stopped. He knelt beside her, his chest tightening, but there were no tears, only silence. The house felt colder than ever. He called the doctor, then the authorities, then finally sat down and waited as the sun set behind the trees. Everything he had done, every ounce of rage, every sleepless night, it had all been for her. And now she was gone. The funeral was small. A few neighbors came, people who still remembered Ruth from when she used to bake pies for church gatherings or read stories to children. Daniel stood alone beside the grave as the snow began to fall again. When everyone else left, he stayed. "I did what I thought was right," he whispered. "I didn't hurt them, Grandma. I could have, but I didn't." The wind picked up, carrying away his words. For the first time, Daniel cried, not out of anger, but out of loss. After the funeral, he returned to the house and sat at the table with Ruth's old photo album. Each picture felt like a chapter of his childhood. Birthdays, summer barbecues, his mother laughing with Ruth in the garden. He couldn't reconcile the woman in those pictures with the one who had betrayed them. Somewhere along the line, greed had stolen who she was. As the days went on, Daniel packed up the house. He found small notes from Ruth tucked into drawers, reminders to stay kind, to forgive, to live without bitterness. She had written them when her memory was still clear, maybe knowing someday he'd need them. Each one reminded him of the person he wanted to be, not the one revenge had nearly turned him into. One afternoon, as he sorted through her old letters, the phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him to answer. "Daniel?" a soft voice said. It was his mother. He froze. "Why are you calling?" "I heard about Mom," she said, her voice shaking. "I wanted to come, but I thought you wouldn't want to see me." "You're right," he said coldly. I needed to say I'm sorry." There was silence on both ends. Daniel could hear the sound of her breathing, broken and slow. For the first time, she didn't sound like the confident, selfish woman he remembered. She sounded tired, defeated. "She forgave you," he said finally. "Even after everything, she forgave you." His mother sobbed quietly. "I don't deserve that. No," he said. You don't, but that's who she was. Before hanging up, she said, I hope someday you'll find peace too. When the call ended, Daniel sat in silence for a long time. He thought about forgiveness, how Ruth had given it freely, even to those who didn't deserve it. He realized that holding on to anger didn't protect him anymore. It only kept him chained to the past. Over the next few months, Daniel sold the house and moved to the city. He used what little money was left to start over, but he didn't chase wealth or power. Instead, he began volunteering at a senior care center, spending time with people who reminded him of Ruth, people who had stories, who needed someone to listen. Every once in a while, he'd receive a letter from his mother. She was living alone now, working at a small thrift shop. She never asked for forgiveness again. She just wrote about ordinary things, the weather, her garden, memories of Ruth. Daniel didn't reply often, but he didn't throw the letters away either. He kept them in a drawer, beside Ruth's old Bible and her notes. Life moved on quietly. The anger that once consumed him faded into something softer. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. He realized that revenge might give power for a moment, but compassion gave peace for a lifetime. One cold evening, nearly a year after Ruth's passing, Daniel visited her grave. The ground was covered in frost, and the trees stood bare against the pale sky. He brushed the snow off her headstone and placed a single white rose on top. I kept my promise, he said softly. I didn't become like them. A gentle breeze stirred, and for a moment, he thought he heard her voice in it. Calm, warm, forgiving. He smiled faintly. As he walked away, he felt lighter than he had in months. The pain was still there, but it no longer ruled him. He had learned the hardest lesson of all. That true strength wasn't in revenge, but in restraint. Not in anger, but in mercy. And though he would never forget what was taken from him, Daniel finally understood what Ruth had always tried to teach. When you choose forgiveness over revenge, you don't lose, you heal. That night, as the snow began to fall again, Daniel looked up at the sky and whispered, Thank you, Grandma. For the first time since that Thanksgiving, his heart was at peace.